On Christmas Eve, while the house was full of Kendrick's family and the smell of dinner still hung in the air, my husband pointed at me as two cops walked through the doorway. They didn't say much, just my name, my full name, and suddenly every conversation in the room stopped. His mother's fork froze halfway to her mouth. His father stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. I remember looking at Kendrick, hoping to see confusion on his face, maybe concern, anything that showed he wasn't behind this. But he wouldn't even look at me. They told me I needed to step outside, that there was a complaint filed against me. When I asked who filed it, they said one name, his name. My own husband had signed that document. In front of his entire family, he let them believe the worst about me. He let me walk toward the doorway with no explanation, no defense, nothing. But the real shock wasn't that moment. It wasn't even the cold ride downtown or the hours I spent wondering what kind of man would do this to his wife on a holiday. The real shock came later, inside a quiet courtroom, when the door opened and a woman I had never met before walked in with her head lowered. She didn't join the audience or even glance toward Kendrick. Instead, she moved straight to the front of the courtroom and asked the judge for permission to speak. What came out of her mouth shattered every story Kendrick had told. In a single breath, she exposed a truth he thought would never leave the shadows, and her confession turned the entire case upside down. My name is Janelle Hart, and until recently, my life in Cleveland looked calm from the outside. I worked as a medical lab tech at a clinic near University Circle, a place where the days were long but familiar. Most mornings started the same way: coffee in a travel mug, a short prayer before stepping out, and a quick check-in with Kendrick to see if he needed anything before I left. I liked that routine. It made the house feel steady, even on days when the world felt heavier than usual. Janelle loved hosting family gatherings, especially during the holidays. Her kitchen was always the warmest part of the house, filled with slow-cooked meals and the laughter of nieces and nephews running down the hall. Cleveland winters can be rough, but she filled the season with things that made it brighter: church events, community drives, and her annual Christmas brunch. That brunch meant a lot to her, not because of the food, but because it brought people together. She carried the same approach into her marriage. No matter how tired she was, she made space for Kendrick. She believed in choosing grace first, especially when things got tense between them. When his logistics business nearly fell apart, she stepped in without hesitation. She helped him get back on his feet, handled paperwork he didn't understand, and assured him that setbacks didn't define anyone. She meant it. But over the past year, something had shifted in their home. It wasn't loud or obvious. It came quietly through small habits. Kendrick started taking late-night calls in the garage instead of the living room. If she asked who it was, he brushed it off with a quick "work stuff" before changing the subject. He stopped letting his phone sit on the counter while he showered, choosing instead to keep it in his pocket at all times. None of these things were dramatic on their own, but together they left a question lingering in the back of her mind. Still, she held on to the belief that marriage needed patience. She wanted them to be better, stronger, closer. She even researched therapy options, hoping a professional could help them communicate again. Kendrick didn't dismiss the idea, but he didn't commit either. He simply nodded and said, "We'll talk about it later." Later never came. Even then, she didn't assume the worst. She thought they were just going through a season, a rough patch every couple faces sooner or later. She didn't know that the cracks in their home would widen faster than she could calm them. She had no way of knowing that by Christmas Eve, those small hints would explode into a moment that would change everything she believed about love, loyalty, and the man she shared her life with. Before everything collapsed, Janelle often reminded herself that she married Kendrick because he felt steady. Not perfect, not charming in the exaggerated way some men try to be, just steady. He had a calm voice, a determined work ethic, and a way of making plans for the future that made her feel anchored. They met through a friend at a volunteer event years earlier, and she remembered how he stayed behind afterward to help pack leftover supplies. That was the moment she first thought, maybe this man could be part of something real. Their early years together weren't luxurious, but they had peace. Kendrick launched his logistics business from their apartment dining table. He handled the driving and deliveries. She helped with the numbers he couldn't make sense of. When the business hit a rough stretch, He became discouraged and talked about giving up. Janelle took it personally, not in a selfish way, but in the way someone does when they've tied their heart to another person's success. She used part of her savings to help him clear initial debts. She never told anyone, not even her closest friend, because she didn't do it for recognition. She did it for the future she hoped they'd build. Sunday dinners became their ritual. Janelle cooked, Kendrick set the table, and his parents arrived with stories from church or updates about distant relatives Janelle had never met. His mother, Denise, always hugged her longer than expected, whispering things like, "You're the best thing that ever happened to him." Janelle took pride in that. She valued being part of something bigger than herself, and those dinners made her feel woven into a family that embraced her. Holiday seasons were special to her too. She and Kendrick had a tradition of volunteering every December. One year, they served meals at a local shelter near East 105th. Another year, they wrapped gifts for children whose families were struggling. Watching Kendrick chat with people in line, listening, laughing, offering small words of encouragement, made her believe she truly understood who he was. She replayed those memories often, holding on to them like proof that any distance between them now could be reversed if they just tried. But the distance didn't shrink. It widened in ways she didn't notice at first. It began with small shifts. Kendrick changed the password on his phone without mentioning it. When she asked about it, he shrugged and claimed he kept receiving spam messages. She let it go because she didn't want to seem controlling. She trusted him, and trust to her meant not demanding explanations for every small change. His sister, Tasha, became harder to read around that time. Once cheerful and talkative during Sunday dinners, she started giving Janelle short answers, barely making eye contact. When Janelle asked if she had done something wrong, Tasha smiled politely and said, "You're fine. I'm just tired." But the tone didn't match the words. It carried a distance that made Janelle uncertain. She brushed it off, thinking maybe she was imagining things. Still, the shift lingered. Around early autumn, Kendrick began coming home later than usual. He claimed the business was expanding and he needed to meet new clients. Janelle didn't doubt that the business was growing. She saw the invoices and schedules. But she noticed that whenever she tried to help with paperwork, he pulled everything closer, telling her he had it covered. That was odd. He used to rely on her for things like that. He even praised her organization skills. The sudden change made her pause, but she convinced herself that maybe he just wanted to prove he could manage things independently. Then came the night she found the restaurant receipt in his jacket pocket. She hadn't been searching for anything. She was simply tidying up before heading to bed. The receipt slipped out as she lifted the jacket to hang it. The name of the restaurant caught her eye because she had never heard him mention it. When she looked at the date, her heart sank. It was from the evening he claimed he had a work emergency and couldn't return home for dinner. She held the paper in her hand longer than she should have, standing in the bedroom in complete stillness. She didn't want to jump to conclusions. She told herself there were many explanations. Maybe it was a business meeting, maybe he ate with a potential client, maybe the situation wasn't what it looked like. But a quiet ache settled in her chest, and she couldn't ignore it. Janelle kept that receipt tucked in the back of her journal, not because she planned to confront him immediately, but because she needed to figure out how she felt. She wanted to believe her husband. She wanted to believe the best in him. Yet something inside her whispered that life was shifting in ways she could no longer pretend to understand. Despite the unease, Janelle continued to invest in their marriage. She suggested counseling again, mentioning how stress could make communication difficult. Kendrick nodded but didn't commit. He brushed her shoulder gently and said, "Let's get through the holiday season first." His voice was kind, but his eyes drifted away from hers. Through all of this, she held on to hope. Not the passive kind, but the hope that comes from choosing to work on a marriage even when it feels tired. She organized the Christmas Eve gathering at his parents' home, wanting the warmth of family to remind them what mattered. She prepared gifts, planned dishes, and even set aside a moment to talk to Kendrick about reconnecting. What she didn't know was this. While she was trying to mend what felt strained, someone else had already stepped into the space she was fighting to protect. She could sense tension, yes, but she didn't know the depth of what was happening. If she had known what Kendrick was planning, what he was willing to risk, She would have walked into that Christmas Eve dinner with a completely different heart. Christmas Eve at Kendrick's parents' house was usually loud. Laughter, overlapping conversations, the kind of warmth that made winter feel lighter. Janelle had just set a dish on the table when the front door opened without warning. 2 cops stepped inside, their presence cutting through the room so quickly that the noise fell into silence. Forks lowered. Chairs stopped moving. Every eye shifted toward the entryway. One of the cops asked, "Is there a Janelle Hart here?" The sound of her name froze her in place. She wiped her hands on a kitchen towel, unsure whether she had heard correctly. Kendrick was standing near the hallway, and instead of stepping forward or asking what was going on, he took a slow step back, positioning himself behind his father. That movement, subtle as it was, stung more than she could explain. "I'm Janelle," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The officer nodded. "Ma'am, we need you to step outside with us." Kendrick's mother pressed a hand over her chest. "But what's happening?" Janelle turned to Kendrick, expecting him to speak, to defend her, to show even a hint of surprise. His eyes dropped toward the floor, refusing to meet hers. Something inside her tightened. She took a careful breath and asked, "What is this about?" "There's a complaint filed against you," the officer said. Then he added the part that made her knees weaken. "Filed by your husband." A murmur spread through the room as if the walls themselves had reacted. Janelle felt the world tilt, not dramatically, but enough to make it hard to breathe. Kendrick's father stared at his son with disappointment. His sister folded her arms, watching with an expression she had been carrying for months, as if she had been waiting for this moment to arrive. Janelle swallowed hard, trying to form words. "Kendrick," she managed. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just kept looking toward the floor, as though silence might protect him from the fallout he created. The officer gave her a moment, then said softly, "Ma'am, we'll explain at the station." Her pulse kicked up sharply. Heat rose to her face, followed by a cold rush down her back. She felt exposed, not because the cops were there, but because Kendrick was letting this happen without a single word to stop it. She was standing in a room filled with people who were supposed to know her, to trust her, and she suddenly felt like a stranger in their home. Janelle nodded slowly, choosing dignity even as her chest tightened. She handed the towel to the nearest chair and stepped toward the doorway. No one blocked her path. No one asked for clarity. Kendrick didn't follow or offer a single explanation. Walking out of that house, she sensed that whatever waited outside would change her life. What she didn't know yet was how deep the betrayal ran, or who else had played a part in the moment that ripped her entire world open. The cold air outside Kendrick's parents' house hit Janelle harder than she expected. She wrapped her arms around herself, partly for warmth and partly to hold together what felt like the beginning of a crack inside her chest. The cops weren't aggressive, they didn't rush her or treat her harshly. But every step toward the patrol car felt surreal, like her mind was struggling to catch up with her own body. She wanted to shout, to demand that Kendrick come outside and face her. She wanted to ask how he could sign anything against her when he knew exactly what kind of woman she was, steady, careful, loyal to a fault. But the urge never reached her lips. She understood instinctively that anything she said in that moment would be swallowed by the chaos of the night, misunderstood, or worse, used against her. So she stayed silent. When the cops opened the car door, she paused for a second, hoping, just hoping, that Kendrick would appear behind them, call her name, or admit there had been some kind of mistake. The doorway remained empty. No footsteps. No voice. No explanation. Inside the car, she stared at her hands. They were shaking slightly, a small betrayal of what she felt inside. Her breath came shallow, and she forced herself to slow it down. She needed to stay clear-headed. She needed to understand what was happening before she reacted in a way she couldn't take back. The ride to the station was quiet. Streetlights passed in rhythmic intervals, each one flickering across her reflection in the window. She barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked calm, too calm for what had just happened. That calmness wasn't strength, it was the mind protecting itself from a blow it still didn't know how to process. At the station, when an officer asked whether she wanted to call someone, her first instinct was to dial Kendrick. Her thumb hovered over his contact for a moment before she pulled her hand back. The man who filed a complaint against her wouldn't answer. And if he did, she doubted any words would come from him that she needed to hear. Instead, she asked a single question: "What exactly did he accuse me of?" "We can go through that in the morning," the officer replied. "For now, just try to rest." The word felt almost insulting. She lay down later on the thin mattress inside the holding room, staring at the ceiling. A rush of thoughts tried to drown her: anger, confusion, fear, but she pushed through them, searching for something she could hold on to. Anything. And then it came to her. If Kendrick was willing to go this far, she needed to be smarter than whatever he was planning. She needed to pay attention, stay controlled, and gather information. Her first decision wasn't loud, and it wasn't dramatic. It formed quietly in the back of her mind, steady and deliberate. She would survive this moment and find out the truth behind it. Morning crept into the holding area through a narrow window high on the wall. The light did nothing to warm the room, but it helped Janelle stay alert. She sat on the edge of the bench, hands clasped, waiting for someone to tell her what her husband had accused her of. When the door opened, a public defender stepped inside holding a manila folder tucked under his arm. His expression wasn't hostile, just distant, the way people look when they've seen too many strange cases. He sat across from her and flipped the folder open. "Your husband submitted documents showing you signed for several business transactions," he said. "But these signatures, they don't match your writing samples." Her stomach tightened. "I never signed anything like that," she replied. He nodded as if he already expected her answer. "I believe you. Whoever signed these tried to mimic your style, but it's sloppy." A slow wave of dread moved through her. She had helped Kendrick with paperwork before. He knew exactly how she wrote her name. The idea that he, or someone he trusted, would forge her signature felt heavier than anything she'd processed so far. The lawyer kept talking, but her mind drifted. The reality settled in quietly. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone had deliberately tried to pull her into something she never agreed to. Her pulse picked up. Not fast, but enough that she could feel it in her throat. The lawyer closed the folder. "We'll address this in the hearing," he assured her. "For now, stay calm. The truth is on your side." The truth might be, but her husband wasn't. Later that afternoon, an officer directed her to a phone mounted on the wall. "You can make one call," he said. Janelle nodded and lifted the receiver with hands that felt colder than before. She dialed Kendrick's number from memory. Years of marriage make certain things impossible to forget. The line rang once, twice, then again. She pressed the receiver closer to her ear, praying he would answer. Each ring reminded her how far he had drifted from the man she thought she knew. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. A quiet ache settled under her ribs. She wasn't naive. She knew what it meant when someone who once answered your calls without hesitation suddenly treated you like a stranger. Standing there with the phone pressed against her cheek, she realized he hadn't acted in panic last night. He hadn't been overwhelmed. He had been prepared. She hung up the receiver slowly, feeling the emptiness stretch across her chest. Abandonment wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the sound of a phone that never stopped ringing. The officer guided her back to the waiting area, but her mind stayed behind with that lifeless dial tone. Whatever Kendrick was doing, he didn't intend to rescue her from it. By late afternoon, she was brought to a small visitation room. To her surprise, her best friend Mia was waiting on the other side of the glass, eyes wide with worry. Seeing someone who actually cared about her cracked something open inside Janelle, but she held her composure. She picked up the phone, and Mia did the same. "I need you to stay calm," Mia said immediately. Her voice trembled slightly. "I found something." Janelle's fingers tightened around the handset. "What is it?" Mia held up her phone to the glass. A photo filled the screen. Kendrick stood outside a hotel entrance, talking closely with a woman Janelle had never seen before. The woman's hand rested lightly on his arm, and Kendrick didn't pull away. The timestamp at the corner of the image forced her to swallow hard. It was taken the same night he told her he had an unexpected delivery route. Her breath caught. She felt the weight of betrayal settle deeper, no longer just suspicion but something undeniable. The woman next to Kendrick wasn't a client. She wasn't a coworker. She was someone who stood comfortably close to him in a way that suggested familiarity. Mia lowered the phone and pressed her palm to the glass. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Janelle forced herself to breathe steadily, though her throat felt tight. It wasn't just the photo, it was the confirmation that Kendrick had built a life she knew nothing about. While she fought for their marriage, he was somewhere else creating memories with another woman. Her chest ached as she nodded to Mia. "I'll be okay," she said quietly, even though she wasn't sure she believed it. But she needed the sentence to exist. She needed to hear herself claim something solid. The guard signaled that time was up. Janelle placed the phone back on the hook with trembling fingers and walked out of the room feeling heavier than when she entered. The betrayal was no longer theoretical. It was alive, active, and standing right next to the man who put her behind these walls. That night, after hours of stillness in the holding cell, the door opened again. A different officer approached with a printed form for her to sign, clarifying what would happen in the morning. As he handed her the paper, she noticed a name typed near the bottom under Additional Statement, Luz Rayner. She felt a jolt of recognition, not because she knew the woman personally, but because the name had floated through one of Tasha's old college stories. If this was the same woman, the betrayal ran deeper than she imagined. She stared at the name, feeling a cold wave run through her. Once the officer left, she sat on the edge of the bench, replaying old memories of Tasha's conversations, mentions of a girl from her program, someone who drifted in and out of their circle years ago. The puzzle pieces arranged themselves with painful clarity. This wasn't random. Someone close to Kendrick had helped open the door to whatever he was doing. She leaned her head back against the wall, closing her eyes. It wasn't just her husband hiding things. His sister knew something. Maybe not everything, but enough to treat Janelle with distance. Enough to remain silent while her life unraveled. The layers of betrayal kept expanding. Kendrick's lies, the forged documents, the ignored calls, the hotel photo, and now this name linking him to someone with a tie to his sister. Janelle opened her eyes slowly, the weight of the truth anchoring her breaths. She whispered one sentence to herself, not out of panic but out of clarity. This wasn't an accident. For the first time since the cops walked into the Christmas Eve dinner, she understood that what happened to her wasn't rooted in confusion or misunderstanding. It was deliberate, coordinated, thought through. And if they planned this carefully, she needed to be even more careful in how she moved next. Night in the holding room stretched longer than any she had lived through. Sleep never came. Every time Janelle closed her eyes, the image Mia showed her returned, the woman leaning close to Kendrick, the timestamp exposing a lie he had delivered so casually. She replayed his distance, his silence, his sister's coldness, the forged signatures, and the complaint filed in his handwriting. One truth rose above everything else. She had been pushed into a corner he expected her to stay in. She sat upright on the bench, steadying her breath. Hurt hadn't disappeared, but something else emerged beneath it, a sharpened clarity she hadn't felt before. If Kendrick wanted this to unfold in a courtroom, then that would be the place she confronted the truth. Not with yelling, not with desperation, but with evidence he never thought she could gather. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, whispering to herself, "He wants a courtroom, he'll get the truth." When morning came, the public defender returned, prepared with paperwork and a calm explanation of what would happen next. This time, she listened with intention. She asked questions. She pointed out every inconsistency she remembered from the business records she once organized for Kendrick. Her attorney took notes quickly, raising his brows more than once as she connected details he hadn't yet considered. The forged signatures that first frightened her now fueled something different: resolve. "We can challenge each document," he told her. "But we need to move carefully. If his accusations stick, the consequences are severe. Fraud charges carry weight." Weight wasn't a new feeling to her. She carried a household, a marriage, a family's expectations. She carried disappointment and hope at the same time for months. Whatever risk lay ahead, it couldn't be heavier than what she already felt. "We'll move forward," she replied. "But I need you to look into a woman named Luz Rayner. She's tied to his sister." I need to know how she fits into this. The lawyer paused, then nodded. I'll start digging. A plan took shape piece by piece. Expose the documents. Show the motive behind the complaint. Uncover Luz's connection to Kendrick's life outside their home. Reveal the pattern he had been building in secret. The stakes were harsh. If she failed, she could lose her job at the clinic. Positions like hers depended on trust and precision. A fraud charge, even a disputed one, could end her career. And the thought of being linked to Kendrick's actions publicly carried its own kind of pain. But fear no longer dictated her choices. She wasn't fighting to win Kendrick back. She wasn't fighting for sympathy. She was fighting to reclaim the truth someone tried to take from her. When the officer arrived to escort her to the transport van, she rose with calm purpose. For the first time since Christmas Eve, she felt like her feet were on solid ground. Shaking, yes, but steady enough to walk toward whatever waited in that courtroom. She didn't know yet that the truth would arrive from the most unexpected person in the building. But she was ready to face it. The municipal courtroom felt colder than the winter morning outside. Frost clung to the edges of the windows, and each breath Janelle took rose faintly in the air before fading. She sat beside her attorney at the front table, hands folded, posture straight. She had prepared herself for this moment, prepared to hear Kendrick repeat lies in front of strangers, prepared to see him look at her as if she were the problem he needed to get rid of. What she wasn't prepared for was how quietly he entered. Kendrick pushed open the courtroom door with slow steps, a stiffness in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. He avoided looking at her, keeping his gaze fixed on the judge's bench. His sister sat in the gallery, arms crossed tightly, shifting restlessly in her chair. His parents whispered between themselves, their faces caught between confusion and embarrassment. The bailiff called the room to order. The echo settled over everyone like a sheet being pulled tight. The judge began reviewing the preliminary notes. Mr. Cole has submitted a statement alleging financial misconduct by his wife. We will hear his testimony shortly. Janelle's heart thumped once, deep and heavy. She kept her eyes forward, refusing to give Kendrick the satisfaction of watching her react. Her attorney leaned slightly toward her. Stay steady, he whispered. She nodded. Kendrick was called to the witness stand. He walked toward it with the confidence of someone who believed he had secured every angle. He placed his hand on the Bible, took the oath, and sat down. He cleared his throat, glancing briefly toward the gallery, perhaps looking for support from his sister. Tasha gave a small nod, more nervous than encouraging. The judge asked, Mr. Cole, you may begin by explaining the basis of your complaint. Kendrick parted his lips as if ready to deliver a rehearsed speech, but before he produced a single sentence, the courtroom doors opened again. The sound was small, but it drew every head. A woman stepped through the doorway with a slow, hesitant step. Janelle didn't recognize her at first. She only saw tension in her posture and a shake in her hand as she held a stack of papers against her chest. The woman's eyes flicked toward the judge, then toward Kendrick, who instantly stiffened. Her attorney whispered, That must be Luz. Janelle's breath caught. She didn't blink. The judge paused. Identify yourself, please. The woman swallowed before speaking. My name is Luz Rayner. I need to address the court regarding this case. Kendrick's reaction was immediate. Your Honor, she doesn't have anything to do with. The judge raised a hand, silencing him. Ms. Rayner, step forward. Luz approached the stand, staying a careful distance away from Kendrick. She held the papers as though they were burning her palms. The courtroom had gone so silent that even the shifting of winter wind outside felt louder than the murmurs she'd expected to hear. The judge asked calmly, What information do you have that pertains to this matter? Luz took a deep breath. Mr. Cole isn't telling the truth about his wife. Her voice cracked slightly, but she pushed on. He pressured me to help him file those complaints. He told me what to write. He told me what signatures to copy. Janelle didn't move, but inside, something uncoiled, slowly, carefully, as if it didn't trust the moment yet. Whispers rose across the gallery. Kendrick's parents exchanged horrified glances. Tasha's face drained of color. Kendrick leaned forward, panic creeping into his voice. That's not true. She's lying to protect herself. Luz shook her head. She finally turned to face him, and her expression held a mix of guilt and resignation. I'm not lying. You promised we were doing this so you could separate cleanly. You told me she wouldn't fight back. You told me this was the only way to get out without losing your business. The judge's gaze sharpened. Ms. Rayner, are you stating that Mr. Cole intentionally falsified documents and submitted them under his wife's name? Yes. Her answer came out firm, cutting the air like a clean strike. He told me exactly how to do it. The room erupted, gasps, startled whispers, a woman in the back covering her mouth. The judge called for silence. But Luz wasn't done. She gripped the papers tighter and continued, he also told me he was planning to leave his wife. He said he needed leverage to avoid a messy divorce. I believed him. I believed a lot of things he said, until I found out he was seeing someone else at the same time. Her voice wavered but didn't break. I thought I was helping him build a new life. I didn't realize he was preparing to pin everything on me too. Kendrick slumped slightly, the facade he carried collapsing by fractions. His lawyer rose halfway as if considering an objection, but the judge's raised brows stopped him cold. Luz set the papers on the ledge before the bench. These are the messages he sent me. They show what he asked me to do. I'm sorry for my part in it, but I'm not letting him ruin another woman's life. The judge reviewed the first page, and her expression tightened. She turned to Kendrick. Mr. Cole, you have the right to remain silent, but I strongly advise you to confer with your counsel. He opened his mouth, shut it again, and looked toward his family. His father stared at him with stunned disappointment. His mother covered her mouth, eyes shining with regret. Tasha wouldn't meet his gaze at all. Janelle felt no triumph. Only a slow exhale she had been holding since the moment the cops walked into that Christmas Eve dinner. Everything she feared had crystallized into truth right here, in front of everyone who once believed Kendrick could do no wrong. The judge turned back to Luz. Your testimony and evidence will be admitted into the record. With a single sentence, the entire structure Kendrick built crumbled. And for the first time since this nightmare began, the truth finally stood on its own. The judge took only a few minutes to reach her decision, though it felt much longer to everyone in the room. When she spoke, her tone held no hesitation. The charges against Mrs. Hart are dismissed immediately. The evidence presented shows clear misconduct on the part of Mr. Cole. A short pause followed before she added, Mr. Cole, you will be taken into custody while further investigation proceeds. The bailiff stepped toward the witness stand. Kendrick's posture stiffened, and for the first time, he seemed fully aware of what he had triggered. His eyes darted across the room, toward his parents, toward his sister, toward Janelle, but no one moved to defend him. The confidence he carried earlier had drained away, leaving only a man scrambling for an explanation he no longer controlled. As he was escorted toward the side door, he tried to speak. This isn't what it looks like. I didn't mean. His voice cracked, cut short by the officer guiding him forward. Janelle watched in silence. She didn't smirk. She didn't flinch. She simply breathed, deeply and fully, as though her lungs had been released from a weight she didn't realize she was carrying. The knot that had sat in her chest since Christmas Eve finally loosened. Her attorney leaned toward her. You're free to go, he said gently. She nodded, absorbing the words at her own pace. Kendrick's parents remained seated, stunned. His mother reached for a tissue. His father stared at his hands, unable to lift his head. Tasha kept her gaze fixed on the floor, the truth having filled every corner she previously avoided acknowledging. When the courtroom door closed behind Kendrick, the room exhaled collectively. Janelle stood and gathered her things. Her movements were slow, grounded, almost methodical. She wasn't celebrating, she wasn't angry. She was simply reclaiming herself, one breath at a time. She stepped into the hallway, the cold air drifting through the building, and for the first time in days, she felt steady enough to move forward. Janelle didn't return to the home she shared with Kendrick. Instead, she went straight to her sister Camille's apartment on the east side of Cleveland. Camille greeted her with a long, steady hug. No questions, no assumptions, just the quiet relief of someone grateful to see her safe. For the first time in days, Janelle allowed herself to sit on a couch without tension running through her shoulders. The weight of the past week didn't disappear, but it finally stopped pressing so hard. That evening, she opened her laptop at the kitchen table and began the process of filing for divorce. She moved slowly, reading each line twice before confirming anything. The decision wasn't fueled by anger, it came from a place of clarity. The man who once promised to protect their marriage had treated her as disposable. There was nothing left to salvage. Camille made tea and sat beside her without interrupting. Every now and then, she placed a gentle hand on Janelle's arm, a reminder that she wasn't moving through this alone. Over the next few days, Janelle contacted her workplace, met with her attorney again, and began sorting out the pieces of her life that Kendrick had tried to distort. Rebuilding wasn't dramatic, it was steady. She focused on small things, resting more, attending church service, taking walks to clear her head. Each step reminded her that she still had control over her path, despite the chaos she had just survived. When she returned to the courthouse to sign final documents related to the case dismissal, she paused on the steps before going inside. Snow drifted quietly around her, settling on her coat and hair. She lifted her face toward the sky, breathing in the cold air. It wasn't heavy or sharp this time. It felt clean. She closed her eyes and released a slow exhale, one that carried days of fear, betrayal, and uncertainty out of her chest. For the first time in a long while, she felt the beginning of peace. If you've stayed with this story to the end, thank you. Stories like Janelle's remind us how quickly life can shift, and how strength often shows up in the quiet moments, when someone chooses truth over fear and peace over chaos. If this touched you in any way, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us continue sharing real, human stories that speak to courage, healing, and resilience. And if you're going through something heavy yourself, know this, you're not walking through it alone. There's a whole community here that understands what it means to rebuild your life piece by piece. Hit that subscribe button so you're here for the next chapter.